Welcome to Magnificent Minds, where we explore the science of child development with both heart and reason, bringing clarity, compassion, and scientific evidence to questions that matter deeply to families. I want to start today with a scene. It's early afternoon at an autism therapy clinic in North Carolina. The room is full of preschoolers, 3, 4, 5 years old, and one little girl has fallen asleep in her chair. She's exhausted. After exactly 7 minutes, her behavior technician wakes her up. She has to keep going because the clinic has a policy. A child can't be allowed to sleep more than 7 minutes at a time. 7 minutes. And here's what's really troubling. The reason is because the clinic can't bill insurance if the child sleeps more than that. They bill when the child is awake and receiving therapy. This is real. This was reported just 2 weeks ago by the New York Times in an investigation into a chain of autism clinics called Complete Kids. And what they described is a system that had completely lost sight of something fundamental. We are here to do what's best for a child. They had replaced making the right clinical decisions with making the most profitable financial decisions. Now, I work closely with families whose children are anywhere in age from toddlers to teens, and they are juggling so much, trying their best, as you are, to do what's right for their child. On top of that, to think that the professionals out there who are supposed to be helping are actually making decisions to harm your child for financial motive, it is terrifying. And for autism services, it's happening among some ABA providers. And this is why there have been major news headlines in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, The Economist, and many other leading news outlets about this. So I want to give you the knowledge you need to make sure this doesn't happen to your child, because I'm a pediatric neurologist and a board-certified behavior analyst. And because of the work that we do at Cortica to deliver physician-led whole child autism care, where ABA is one part of an integrated medical home model of care, I have expertise in exactly how ABA hours should be prescribed, what the research actually shows about dosage and outcomes, what a responsible program that prioritizes the child's progress and well-being actually looks like, and how you can ensure your child gets the right care. Let me say one more thing about the recent headlines. While reporters have been very focused on exposing the problem recently, some have actually looked at our model at Cortica, our research outcomes, and even visited our clinics. And the Economist reporter Daniela Raz said it best. She wrote in her article, "At the Cortica Center, children move from room to room, sounding out words with speech therapists, practicing motor skills with occupational therapists, and seeing a pediatrician who monitors their nutrition and their medications. Such coordinated care is essential. It is also all too rare." The message I'm delivering today is really important for you to hear, because if parents are looking for the right things, asking the right questions, choosing the right programs, and know what to look for in the design of their child's therapy program, then ABA providers who are doing wrong will no longer have children in their care, and those who are doing right will grow, and more children will be able to access the best care. So let's get into it now. But before I dive into the research, I want to tell you about a family I worked with, and I'll call the child Max. He was 3.5 when his family first came to see me. He had just been diagnosed with autism, and his parents had done everything they were told to do. They had gotten his diagnostic evaluation and then enrolled Max in an ABA program, and they were told he needed 40 hours per week by this particular ABA provider, and they were also told that if they didn't commit to that intensity of program hours, they could not receive services from that provider. Now, the parents didn't think this was right, and they worried that it meant stopping his speech language therapy and his occupational therapy services because they simply couldn't fit those into his 40-hour per week ABA schedule. But they worried also that if they didn't move forward, it would delay getting ABA services started at all. Now, 6 months after that experience, they came to me because something felt wrong. Max wasn't sleeping, He was having meltdowns that were getting worse, not better. He seemed exhausted and just not himself. He was also constipated, only having one bowel movement a week, and he only ate about 10 different foods. He had lost weight, and they were worried about his nutrition. Max's parents thought a 40-hour per week ABA program must be what Max needed. Why else would the ABA provider have made that a requirement in order for him to receive services there? But what Max really needed was a whole child program, one that included medical care, like help with his sleep, constipation, feeding, developmental therapies like occupational therapy to help with sensory processing and regulation, and speech-language therapy to help with communication, and family support through coordination of care and counseling to reduce stress and lighten the load for his whole family. No child can learn well when they're not sleeping, getting appropriate nutrition, and feeling comfortable in their own body. That's true for every child. And for autistic children who are already navigating a world full of significant sensory and cognitive demands, it's even more true. So we adjusted his medical care, addressed his sleep, reconfigured his therapy schedule, and designed an ABA program that his nervous system could actually handle while still getting him the number of hours that would maximize his progress. It meant 5 hours in the clinic each day and 3 hours at home twice per week for a total of 31 hours per week. And within a few months, he was a different child, fully engaged in sessions, achieving new goals every week, calmer and happier at home, sleeping through the night, eating nutritious food, having soft daily bowel movements, speaking and communicating. And after 6 months, we were able to transition out of the clinic setting into a preschool in his community with a behavior technician with him to provide one-to-one support in the community preschool. What changed wasn't that he got more therapy. What changed was that the therapy he received was finally calibrated to what his body and his brain needed. And because he was getting better, learning and feeling his best, the number of hours of ABA could be steadily reduced, and he could move out of the clinic setting into a community preschool. Now, I want you to hold that story in mind as we talk about the research and think about what a complete whole child program, not an ABA only or ABA dominant program, but a whole child program where ABA is one component, what that makes possible. Okay, let's talk about what the research actually shows. Now, the idea that more hours of ABA equals better outcomes, which has been used by some ABA providers to justify 40 hours per week for every child they see, well, that idea didn't come from nowhere. It's connected to research studies of ABA, which found that intensive ABA of 25 to 40 hours a week produced significant gains for young autistic children. And that was genuinely important research. But here's what happened next. The message got distorted. The idea that intensive hours of ABA can be helpful for some children is true. But the problem is that it became every autistic child needs as many hours of ABA as possible. And that is not true. And that leap from prescribing hours based on careful clinical evaluation to recommending it for every child and requiring that it be delivered only in an ABA center, that is where things have gone wrong. Now, some ABA providers will say they only take children who meet the criteria set by research studies as being the children who need 30 to 40 hours per week of ABA. Then you have to wonder why. Why are they choosing only to serve that small subset of children and not all children who can benefit from ABA? Well, you've probably figured it out. It is a financial decision. Any ABA provider that is only choosing to serve children who need 30 to 40 hours per week is doing so because that's their business model. And I would urge you to look elsewhere because they may be prioritizing finances over clinical integrity when making other decisions too. Now, another problem with this approach is that as soon as a child no longer falls into that category, they often will abruptly stop services. I see it happen all the time. Now, I want to be careful here because this doesn't mean that hours don't matter at all. In fact, they do, especially for younger children with significant learning needs. But what matters is getting the right care for the underlying root issues, medical, biological, developmental, not treating everything as behavior, but rather understanding the brain and body function that determines behavior. Because it's not just about hours, but is the child getting the right care for what they need? Are they getting medical care for co-occurring medical conditions? Are they getting occupational therapy for sensory processing needs, for motor skills? Are they getting speech-language therapy for their communication needs? Are they getting mental health support for their emotional needs? And it works so much better if these are provided by a team of expert professionals who specialize in autism, are really focused on working together, closely collaborating and integrating the services they provide. That team needs to be communicating and ensuring everything they're doing is aligned. Now, keep that in mind because I'm going to tell you shortly much more about what does predict progress, including some breaking new research just published this year. But before we do that, I want to give you the framework that will show you the right way to go about determining ABA hours. The number of ABA hours a child should get is determined by three main things. First, which developmental domains need to be addressed and how significantly? Communication, social development, daily living skills, cognitive learning, motor skills. Every child has a different profile. And a child with significant challenges across many domains may genuinely need intensive support with more hours. But a child with more focused needs shouldn't be in as intensive a program just because that's the only type of program the ABA provider offers. Second, the presence and severity of behaviors that are affecting the child's safety or affecting their ability to learn. But, and I want to really emphasize this, before you can address those behaviors clinically, you have to understand why they're happening. Because very often, behaviors in autistic children are signals. They're telling us something about the child's biology, about their medical state, or their sensory experience, or their emotional regulation. And if you respond to those behaviors with just more ABA therapy hours without understanding the underlying cause, you risk doing more harm than good. The third consideration is the child's age. The developing brain has extraordinary plasticity in the early years, and that does support more intensive intervention for young children. But age is just one factor in the equation. So, in practice, what does this look like? Well, let me walk you through how it maps to a real program structure when it's part of a whole child program. At Cortica, a child entering care starts with a full neurodevelopmental evaluation, neurological, behavioral, and medical. And then a care plan is built around what that specific child needs. From there, therapy is calibrated to a program level. So for children in the most intensive phase, what we call a comprehensive program, ABA services would range anywhere from 25 to 40 hours a week. And I want to be clear, that's a range based on individual need. It's not a default. And it also exists within a broader plan that includes speech therapy, occupational therapy, counseling, and medical care, if that's what a child needs. And all of this is coordinated. As a child makes progress, the hours step down intentionally. In the next phase, the focused program, we're typically at 15 to 25 hours, then 5 to 15 hours in our transition program, then maintenance only as needed. That downward arc is really important. Real progress means you need less intensive support over time. And every 6 months, there is a complete reassessment with the family and the clinical team, and we look at the data, we look at skill growth, we look at family empowerment, and whether the intensity is decreasing as it should be. That's what a living, responsive clinical program looks like. Now, that new study I mentioned, let's get to it. In April 2026, a study was published in the Journal of Personalized Medicine that I want every parent of an autistic child to know about. The research study, which took place through a collaboration between researchers at Cortica and NYU, looked at progress in development and behavior for children receiving care through Cortica's model, our medically centered interdisciplinary care model with behavioral and developmental therapies working in synchrony, overseen by a physician specializing in autism care. And the researchers compared those children, the ones at Cortica, to a national sample from the National Database of Autism Research. And they used a very sophisticated statistical analysis so that they were comparing children with similar profiles across these groups. And they tracked outcomes over time using a standardized assessment that's very, very often used in the field of ABA called the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales. And this measures real-world functioning, communication, daily living skills, and socialization skills. And what the researchers found is that children in Cortica's whole child medically integrated model showed significantly greater growth in adaptive behavior and developmental outcomes across every single domain when compared to that national sample. Now, what made the difference was not more hours. It was a more integrated whole child model of care. And that's the finding that I think reframes this entire conversation. Because the question should not be, how do I get my child the most ABA hours? The question should be, how do I get my child into the best model of care? And the best model for a child to make the most lasting progress is one where ABA is just one piece of a broader care program. Now, I want to get to one more point that I almost never hear discussed when families are planning their child's program. And it matters enormously. The ABA prescription isn't just hours per week. It is also where those hours happen, what occurs during those hours, and what else needs to fit into the week. Think about it this way. A child spending 40 hours a week in an ABA center is having a completely different experience from a child whose hours are spread across a center, the home, maybe other community settings, and possibly even some hours at school. So practicing skills in the actual environments where those skills need to work, that is essential. Home-based therapy is where caregiver coaching happens, where skills get practiced in real contexts, where the child's family becomes equipped to support their learning every hour of every day, not just the hours when a therapist is present. If a child is spending all their time in a center and almost no time working with their family in their natural environment, something important is missing. Then there's the question of individual versus group. Some skills need one-on-one work, but social skills, by definition, need to be practiced with other people. A program that is entirely individual sessions may actually be limiting a child's opportunities to develop the skills that matter most. And then there's this. A child's week cannot be wall-to-wall therapy. There has to be room for family, for play that is child-led, for siblings, grandparents, neighbors, friends, for the natural flow of childhood. So a schedule so packed with intervention that there's no time left for living, that's not in a child's best interest. And I say that as someone who also knows deeply the value of therapy services. I want to speak directly to you now as a parent, as someone navigating these decisions. I know some families have chosen not to pursue an integrated medical model because they've been told that what their child needs is the maximum number of hours. And I understand why some parents make the decision to go with that type of program. The system has been sending that message loudly for years. When you're looking at an ABA prescription for your child, the questions to ask aren't just how many hours. They are, where will the hours be delivered? What's the balance between center, home, and community? What's the ratio of individual to group? And is there room left in this week for my child to be just a child? Remember Max, the little boy I told you about at the start of this episode? The one who was exhausted, melting down, not sleeping, receiving 40 hours of therapy a week? No one was asking, why is this child so dysregulated? Why are things getting worse? What is his body telling us? Sleep disorders affect somewhere between 50 and 80% of autistic children. That is an extraordinary number. And a child who is chronically sleep deprived can't learn well in therapy. Full stop. Their nervous system is in survival mode. Their brain is not in a state to consolidate new skills. When the New York Times investigated those North Carolina clinics, they described children being woken from naps so that the clinic could keep billing. And what struck me was that they didn't realize the child needed a doctor to evaluate their sleep. Co-occurring conditions in autism are not edge cases. GI issues, anxiety, seizure disorders, immune dysregulation, sensory processing challenges, these are not exceptions. These are the rule. And they shape every moment of every therapy. And if they're not being addressed, you're not just wasting hours, you may be asking a child to perform in conditions that are genuinely unfair to them. If this episode was helpful, please share it. There are parents out there right now making these decisions without this information, and you could be the reason they find it. I'll see you next time right back here on Magnificent Minds.